dear friends and fellow activists committed to the liberation of Palestine. It's a challenging honor to be here on this outstanding program, and I thank our chairwoman for her gracious words of introduction, and I thank the conveners for bringing us all together at this critical time in the Palestinian struggle. It's a historic moment, I think, poised between this genocidal ordeal that the Gazans have experienced most directly, and some sequel that promises to challenge the forces, the benevolent forces of society throughout the world, to stop the continuation of what was properly called the Nakba process, and to reverse that expectation by bringing to bear the interests of justice and liberation. The subject matter of international law is always problematic if approached from a progressive perspective, because the law has been used as an instrument of oppression and exploitation. And only recently, in the course of the anti-colonial struggles, and to some extent the experience of World War II, has international law generated a counter-discourse that is associated with the pursuit of justice, where its historical role was primarily the implementation of the interests of the powerful. And so, what my concerns ever since the Vietnam War have been to align international law with this progressive potential of challenging and transcending a world of exploitation and domination that has exploited the global South generally and all people, many peoples who are vulnerable to varying degrees. So in one sense, the appeal to law in the circumstances of the Palestinian struggle is a major way of challenging the continued geopolitical manipulation of law by those countries that won World War II and continue to have an exemption from accountability through the veto in the UN Security Council and through impunity when it comes to accountability for the commission of crimes. And we should remember that the winners of World War II held very publicized war crimes trials in Nuremberg and Tokyo, but only the crimes of the losers were investigated. So we are, in one sense, struggling against a world order system that was shaped back in 1945 by the winners of World War II and reflected their continued strategic ambitions to dominate the former, what became the former colonial world of the global South. And it's against that background that I think we have to appraise both the failures and the success of international law in the context of the Palestinian struggle. And to begin with, the failures are very much emphasized by the global media and by public opinion as both because the sponsors of Israel's behavior have tended to say there is no legal merit in recourse to international law, and therefore somehow accepting a view of the events that's contrary to what the spectacle of daily atrocities that the eyes and the ears of the world have experienced. The American Secretary of State, Blinken, in the Biden period, talked of a rules-governed world. He really meant a ruler-governed world. And it was an expression that didn't invoke international law because the U.S. and its Western allies didn't want to be held accountable for its behavior within the scope of what had been agreed upon and reflected in the UN Charter, basically to appease public opinion at the end of a very destructive period in international history. It was never taken seriously as the design of the UN and the international law kept the pre-war structure of geopolitical primacy when it came to global security and war prevention. So one had these two opposing traditions at work. The correct perception of why even progressive people have been led to say, what use is international law if Israel can violate it so flagrantly and so cruelly and yet not suffer adverse consequences, and enjoy the backing of these liberal democracies that present themselves to the world as the custodians of decency and human rights and so on. So the fact that you had, on the one hand, authoritative decisions by both the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court that backed the popular people's awareness that criminality on a vast scale was taking place, there was no way to implement those findings so long as Israel enjoyed geopolitical backing by the US and the other main Western powers. So it was quite natural to say it's useless to prevail legally if the decisions are not enforced. So the first thing to, I think, understand is what I call the implementation or enforcement gap that interferes with making progressive readings of international law affect behavior directly. In addition to the enforcement gap, there is also the complicity gap, that those that support this kind of gross criminality in the form of genocide are basically ensured of their impunity because there isn't the political traction to bring law to bear on their behavior. So the United States, despite funding and providing so much weaponry, is actually in a position to present itself as part of the solution. It's able to escape its criminality and to behave as if it's a mediating force. And that's been a poisonous element in the Palestinian effort to make use of international diplomacy. They never should have accepted the US as an intermediary in the Oslo diplomacy, because to accept that kind of partisan mediation is basically just politically surrender. And that's very negative kind of betrayal of the struggle. So in addition to this complicity gap, there's finally the accountability gap, in which those that perpetrate these crimes, even though the International Criminal Court issued, after much delay and political maneuvering, arrest warrants, for Netanyahu and former Minister of Defense, Gallant, there is no realistic prospect that they will be enforced in any way or implemented in any way. So those that commit these crimes, unless they are geopolitical losers, have no fear of being held accountable. Having said all this about the limitations of even the progressive dimensions of international law, let me also say a few words about why, despite all this, international law is extremely valuable, and it matters that the ICJ and ICC have sided with a Palestinian interpretation of these events and essentially rejected what Israel has been claiming with the Western support. It's valuable because it legitimates the struggle of people, which is the force of history that has emerged since World War II to undermine the traditional idea that the side in conflicts or struggles that has the superior hard power or military power will politically prevail. The famous adage of the Pope when he said that history is made by the side which has the superior armed forces and the better military capability. The Vietnam War is very paradigmatic for this period because it showed that a people that is mobilized and has the high moral ground and legal ground prevails over a military opponent or adversary that dominated the battlefield. And that was true in all of the subsequent colonial struggles of any significance, that they were politically controlled at the end, after much destruction, by the side with the high moral and political ground. And that, if one thinks of the Palestinian struggle through the lens of settler colonialism, it is important that international law has helped the Palestinians to be winning that legitimacy war. And to date, in almost all important cases, the winners of the legitimacy war politically prevailed. And international law, through this legitimating role, justifies the BDS campaign, and it gives added stimulus to a more militant form of civil disobedience of various ways of doing what governments and international institutions should be doing, but have failed to do. It gives the peoples of the world, through civil society, both the responsibility and the opportunity to allow this struggle, which was enhanced in the South African case by just these kinds of instruments of soft power. And it is for that reason that international law is vital in countering the way in which the public order of governments and institutions fails to uphold a moral foundation for human behavior. So let me conclude by saying that I think that these developments of demonstrating that the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court can be motivated to engage in just interpretations of the law that promote justice, and that that's a vital step in transforming the system of public order. And I end with my hope and prayers for the liberation of Palestine, and by the role of popular movements throughout the world acting in solidarity with that struggle that is the moral test that is being posed to all of us at this time. Thank you very much.